This is a continuation of the lecture on the Winter's Tale. I'll briefly recap the end of Act 2 and we'll move into Act 3, which you've not yet read, but you'll be reading it very soon. And so finish the play for next week and begin working on your first drafts of the essay that is due next week when you meet with me. Those meetings will begin on Tuesday. We'll set them up on Monday night. So if you look to the 1629, page 1629, the end of Act 2, which we haven't discussed much yet, around line 170, I just want to point out what's happening here. So Leontes, resisting, as we know, all evidence that disputes his fantasy, decides that this child is not his. It is a bastard child. It is the child of Hermione and Polixenes. He is sure now, for no reason. And he orders Antigonus at line 170 to 175 to take the bastard female hence and bear it to a remote and desert place out of the way, to its own, and leave it there to its own protection. So what he's doing here, you see my note in the margin, he's exposing the child. This was a practice performed. We see modern versions of this, children being left in dumpsters and so on, performed often by, I shouldn't say often, but performed by peasants who were unable to care for children, and also performed by nobility such as this to hide their bastard children and so on. I don't want to say that it was a common occurrence, but it happened. So being exposed kind of made you feel a little bit less guilty for the death of your child, even though you're indirectly murdering it. You leave it out in the wilderness, and what happens to it happens to it. This child is, of course, going to have extremely good luck, but we'll see more about that in a minute. So Antigonus is going to take the child. At the end of Act 3 that we're turning to, there's a scene in which he is leaving the child, and there's a long speech, and we're going to I'll end this talk at that moment, and I want you to think really carefully for next week. We're going to open class with this, about what actually happens when Antigonus lays that child down and something happens, and then we're suddenly taken into the beginning of Act 4 with a new character who appears once, called Time. All of this is a very, very sudden change in the play, and I want you to think about it. Think about how you'd stage it. There's no single way to do it, but it's a really sort of famous transition and a very interesting one, so we'll get to that. All right, so Act 3, we have the trial scene, the trial of Hermione. She's brought into the court of Leontes, and the indictment is read, and this is at on 1629, around line 10, on the bottom of the right-hand side. So we have the indictment reads, Hermione, queen to the worthy Leontes, king of Sicilia, thou art here accused and arraigned of high treason in committing adultery with Polixenes, king of Bohemia, and conspiring with Camillo to take away the life of our sovereign lord the king, thy royal husband. How about that one? A new charge that she's also trying to murder Leontes. The pretense whereof being by circumstances partly laid open, thou, Hermione, next page, contrary to the faith and allegiance of a true subject, discounsel and aid them for their better safety, fly away by night. And she helped, she's also being accused of helping Camillo and Polixenes flee at night. Remember that Camillo had been ordered by Leontes to murder Polixenes. He refused to do so, told Polixenes, and they both fled to Bohemia. So Hermione responds, and she responds not by taking issue with each point Leontes has said, not by entering into this exchange of words in the way that Leontes wants her to. I asked you to think about this in the previous lecture. So she won't prate, as she'll say in around line 40. She won't prate and talk for her life. She's not going to defend herself in some vulgar way. These charges are beneath her. None of this happened. It's ridiculous for her to argue point by point anyway. He won't believe her, as she says. And she's going to simply present a case for her own integrity generally. This is what I mean by her not buying into the terms of his rhetoric, not buying into the terms of the kind of conversation he wants to have about this. She just rejects those terms. And she'll claim at a line 95 or so on the same page, on page 1630, she'll claim that, her life is not a commodity. She's not going to argue about her life or her integrity if it's something that you can haggle over, as if you're in a common market. She's just not going to do that. So here she says, so what is she doing then? She's presenting a case about her character and her history and who Leontes knows her to be. So she's making a case for herself and not for the validity of these actions that he's claiming she performed. So if we begin reading at around line 21, where Hermione begins to speak on the top left side, since what I am to say must be that which contradicts my accusation, and the testimony on my part no other but what comes from myself, it shall scarce boot me to say not guilty. This is where she begins to tell Leontes, not doing this your way. Doesn't make any sense. You said, am I guilty? I say, no, I'm not. It's a pointless conversation to have because he doesn't believe anything she says anyway, especially about these details of his unhinged fantasy, as Paulina had put it in the end of Act 2. So she says, mine integrity shall, right, being counted falsehood, shall, as I express it, be so received. It will be received as false. But thus, if powers divine behold our human actions as they do, I doubt not them, but innocence shall make false accusation blush, and tyranny tremble at patience. Eventually, the truth will be revealed. Right? You, my lord, best know, and this is where she points to her past life, to what she actually is and actually done, and what he actually knows about this. No fantasy, no imaginary claims about evidence that does not exist, but what she has actually done. Has been as continent, chaste, and true as I am now unhappy, which is more than history can pattern, though devised and played to take spectators. For behold me, a fellow of the royal bed, which O mighty of the throne, a great king's daughter, the mother to a hopeful prince, here standing to prate and talk for life and honor for who please to come and hear. She's being held out there like a commodity, like something to watch. She's a spectacle, being made to beg and barter for her life, and she won't do it. She's not going to be on display in this way, and this is very much like what was expected of the women accused of being witches. They were put out in a public display and accused and told to show that they argue for their innocence, and she says no. She's presenting a case for herself in a sense. She's saying this is who I am, but that's kind of it. All right, she won't do, and she's willing to lose her life because, as she'll say shortly, her life is no more the life that she had anyway. She has lost everything that means, or almost everything, the main thing that's that means anything to her, her esteem in Leontes' eyes, her value to him, her reputation as a chaste and good wife and a good mother, and she's about then to lose much more, unfortunately. So she claims that at line 80, when he continues with these charges and continues with the vulgar language and continues to just repeat himself, he wants her to just say that she's done these things or try to argue against them bit by bit. And she says, sir, she dismisses his entire way of speaking. Sir, you speak a language that I understand not. So I can't even get into this with you because I don't understand your language. You're speaking a different language. My life stands in the level of your dreams, which I'll lay down. Your actions are my dreams. All right, so she tries to say, you're dreaming up things, that you're dreaming up what I've done, and I my life is in these dreams you're having, and I can't really say much to that. And he says, I am only dreaming about what you have already done. Again, there's no talking to him, all right? And she kind of understands this. He threatens her with death, and she responds around line 90. And this is an important passage I'll work through a bit here. Sir, spare your threats. The bug which you would fright me with I seek. To me, life can be no commodity. And there it is again. I'm not arguing, I'm not bartering for this thing, to treating life as just this thing that I can, wrangle for. Especially since, her life as she knows it is no more. She goes through the greatest thing that she's lost, his favor. The second greatest thing that she's lost, the fruits of her body, the daughter that she's just produced, right? And who's been held out to murder. And then she is pained, of course, by myself, line 100, on every post, proclaimed a strumpet. Her reputation is ruined. She proclaimed a whore and a strumpet and an adulteress with immodest hatred, the childbed privilege denied. Now, this is immodest, extreme, excessive hatred. So, not just punishment for her acts, but absolutely hateful punishment. So to have the childbed privilege denied is absolutely unheard of, especially for a queen. So this, I don't think you have a note on this. No, I don't believe you do. The childbed was the time and care away from the rest of the community that the woman who had just given birth was allotted. She had a separate space, a separate room. She was attended on by her ladies in waiting, as if you were a queen, by her friends and other women in the community if you were a peasant, but that this is a privilege that is given to women of all fashion, all classes, everywhere. If you had just had a child, you were expected to rest and to try to keep yourself free of infection, and in this period, really kind of just to try to survive. It was very, very dangerous having a child, and there was a fairly good chance that you could die in childbirth. So there was also a threat of you being out and about in the community, of becoming, developing infections and so on, becoming sick and spreading that sickness. So you were both, it was a public health problem in some ways, if you were out and about after having just given birth. So what Leontes has done is denied her this and been completely irresponsible, not only to her but to the community, and leaving her in a prison cell after having been given birth to a child. This is just horrific. So she's responding justly or rightly to this treatment, this absolutely hateful treatment. What's also interesting about this childbed, this image of the childbed, is that I discussed last time briefly that there's a lot of reference to the hunting of witches and perceiving or regarding women as potentially evil or disease-ridden or threatening in some way. And then on the other hand, we have this Hermione, who is this picture of purity and grace and so on, and we'll come back to that. But here, right, this idea of the childbed also invokes this image of women around together, this kind of, together as if they're in a coven, right, a coven of witches. So very threatening. We've seen a lot of language of, Hermione and even Polixenes' wife maybe perhaps being evil, these charges, burning women and having people burned, and sorcery and so on. This is going to be really interesting when we get to the close of the play, but Shakespeare's audience would have been really familiar with these sorts of accusations and the burnings of women who were accused to be witches. So we have anyway, so that's happening there. Now when we go to 1631, here Leontes calls for the pronouncement from the Oracle at Delphi. And what that means, Delphus was a real place in ancient Greece. There was a priestess there, actually, a woman, priestess of Apollo, the god of wisdom, of judgment, who knows all things. And you would go to, this is where Socrates went, to find out, to ask his question about who is the most wise, or what does wisdom mean. And you would go, and it was accepted culturally that what the Delphic oracle pronounced was absolutely the truth. So Leontes, having gone through and convinced no one of what he believes to be true, having no evidence for it, having the power, of course, to condemn Hermione anyway, still wants some sort of validation for what he's about to do, and truly believes at this point that he'll get that validation by going to Delphi. So he sends his ambassadors, Cleomenes and Dion, to Delphi. And here is the pronouncement. Here is what the Delphic Oracle says. And again, this would have been regarded by absolutely as the truth. This was it. You respected what the priestess, or in this case, Shakespeare's made it a priest, would say. So he says, Hermione is chaste, Polixene blameless, Camillo a true subject, Leontes a jealous tyrant, his innocent babe truly begotten, and the king shall live without an heir if that which is lost be not found. Now this is remarkable. The lords, everybody is blessing great Apollo, everybody's Hermione praised, everything's done, the horrors are over. No. Leontes very calmly comes in at line 40. This is a stunning couple of lines. Without reaction, without rage, very calmly, simply decides there is no truth at all in the oracle. The sessions shall proceed. This is mere falsehood. Why? Simply because he says so. He is truly the tyrant that he has just been called. Right? Tyrant means rule by one. You can do whatever you want. So you don't have to have evidence. You don't have to have proof. It's rule by whim. Now this is different from being sort of like, I guess the idea like a benevolent dictator. So could be a dictator could rule all, presumably, but be benevolent, but be making decisions that benefit everybody, that don't simply respond to his whims. And in this case, Leontes is a tyrant. He does what he wants to do no matter what. And he's convinced that everybody here is guilty, and so the sessions will proceed. It's a horrible, horrible line. Now, I won't say much about what happens following, except to say, as you know, that the boy Mamilius is overcome, is completely distraught by the knowledge that his mother will be going to prison or will be hung or burned. He falls down and faints and dies right there. Hermione runs to him. Paulina tries to take care of the two of them and comes back at around line 200 on 1631, pronouncing that the queen, in fact, has died herself. Leontes suddenly, on 1632, snaps out of it. He just snaps out of his affected state very, very suddenly as he began it. But it took this much. It took this much to get him to sort of unlock, to become a reasonable creature again, to see what was going on around him. And he urges Paulina on the top of page 1632, who continues to insist to him that she's dead and to sort of repeatedly explain how that she is dead, that she will continue to tell him this for so long as he lives. He says, go on, thou canst not speak too much. I have deserved all tongues to talk their bitterest. He wants to hear this. He wants to be reminded and berated for the rest of his life. He does not want to forget what he has done. So we will we'll leave it there, except to say that Leontes is then brought to the dead bodies of the queen and son, guided by Paulina. And we switch then, and I won't say much about this, but we switch then to Antigonus laying down the child. And this is where I said I won't say much more. So read this through, and just note in Antigonus's long speech that he does actually imagine Hermione as this pure white kind of angel up in heaven, and also as this potentially dangerous, demonic kind of witch in a certain way. So there's this real split view of the sort of glory and purity and divinity of woman and the female body in some way, and then also the sort of threat and the danger of it. So it's just kind of fascinating. So we're going to come back to that in the end. Okay, I won't say anything else. I really want you to get to the end of the play. It's kind of remarkable. Okay, I will say one more thing. don't assume that the ending, let's see, I'm trying to say this without giving it away. Read the ending, see what you have to make of it, but don't assume there's one way to read the ending. Okay, that's what I'll say. Yes, there's not one way. The ending can be taken a couple of different ways. All right,